Chapter 1. The Kvite Expedition. The icy winds howled through the bustling port of Erengrad, their biting chill laced with the promise of hardship. At the dockside, the Zimnyaya Dusha loomed, a hulking mass of iron and wood, bristling with harpoons and fortified against the crushing embrace of the northern seas. Steam hissed from its reinforced engines, a defiant growl against the frigid world around it. It was a vessel built for endurance, for survival in waters even Kislav's hardiest sailors feared to tread. Captain Rodrik Volynsky stood atop the gangplank, his fur-lined coat billowing as he surveyed his crew. His weathered face bore the marks of countless voyages, but his eyes, sharp, piercing, and restless, betrayed a deeper obsession. Rodrik was no stranger to the Sea of Claws, but this voyage was different. This was not a routine hunt for seals or a shipment of goods to Norskan ports. No, this was a quest for legend. "My comrades," Rodrik's voice boomed over the din of the harbor, silencing the clamor of workers and sailors alike. "Before you lies the Zimnyaya Dusha, the pride of Kislev. Behind us is safety, warmth, and the mundane trials of ordinary life. But ahead lies glory, riches beyond imagination, immortality in the annals of history." He paused, letting his words sink in. His gaze swept over the gathered crew, grizzled veterans of the seas, fresh-faced lads seeking their first adventure, and the hardened rogues who lived for danger. Each of them was drawn here by his promise, though many still carried doubts. "For centuries, sailors have whispered of a creature in the icy waters of the north," Rodrik continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Moroz-Klyk, the Frostfang, a Leviathan so massive, so cunning, that even the gods fear its wrath. It has devoured ships whole, dragged men screaming into the depths. But no one has captured it, no one has defeated it. That is our task. That is our destiny." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some exchanged skeptical glances, while others clutched amulets or muttered prayers to their gods. A stout man with a thick, graying beard, first mate Pyotr Dragunov, stepped forward, his voice gruff but steady.
"Captain Volynsky,"
Pyotr said, his Kislevite accent heavy. "We've all heard the stories of Moroz-Klyk, and stories they may well be. What makes you so sure it exists? And even if it does, why should we believe we can hunt it?" Rodrik's lips curled into a tight smile. "Because I've seen it, Pyotr," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I saw it tear my father's ship apart when I was just a boy. I saw its eyes glowing like twin suns beneath the waves. I swore then that I would find it, and now I have the ship, the crew, and the weapons to make good on that promise." He stepped closer to the crowd, his voice rising again. "But let me be clear, this voyage is not for the faint-hearted. We will face storms that would cow the gods, waters thick with ice, and horrors that could drive a man mad. Only the strong and the brave will survive. But those who do will be legends." A murmur rippled through the gathered sailors. Fear mingled with excitement, and for some, greed overcame doubt. The promise of fortune, fame, and survival against insurmountable odds was intoxicating. Pyotr gave a resigned nod, and others followed suit. The burly harpooner, Sergei Karamazov, cracked his knuckles and grinned. "Well, Captain, if we're going to face death, it might as well be at the end of a harpoon, eh?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the tension. One by one, they boarded the ship, their boots echoing on the iron deck. As the Zimnyaya Dusha prepared to depart, Rodrik lingered at the edge of the dock, staring into the misty horizon. In his pocket, he clutched a worn medallion, a relic from his father's ship. It was cold against his palm, a chilling reminder of what lay ahead. "Moroz-Klyk," he whispered, the name like a curse and a prayer. "This time, the hunter comes for you." The icebreaker's engines roared to life, sending plumes of steam into the freezing air. With a mighty creak of iron and wood, the Zimnyaya Dusha pushed off from the dock, cutting through the ice-choked waters of Erengrad's harbor. As the city faded into the mist, only the biting wind and the unyielding sea remained. "It seems the weather couldn't favor us after all," Mavis said as she tried to sleep. Rodrik stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Behind him, the crew prepared for the trials to come. None of them, not even Rodrik, could fathom the true cost of the journey ahead. The hunt for Moroz-Klyk had begun. Chapter 2: An Ominous Portrait. The streets of Erengrad were a maze of frost-bitten cobblestones and shadowed alleyways. The city was alive with the sounds of commerce and survival, the sharp cries of fishmongers, the rhythmic pounding of blacksmiths, and the solemn prayers of priests seeking protection from the cold's unrelenting grip. Yet, in the darkest corner of the market district, there was a quieter presence, a small shop with a faded sign that read, "Madame Yelena's Visions and Relics." Captain Rodrik Volynsky hesitated at the doorway, his breath visible in the frigid air. He had heard of Madame Yelena, a reputed seer whose works had graced both the noble courts of Kislev and the rough-hewn hands of its sailors. She was said to peer beyond the veil, seeing not only the present and future, but also the very essence of a man's soul. Rodrik, skeptical of most superstitions, felt a strange pull to her today. He stepped inside, the creak of the door silencing the muffled cacophony of the market behind him. The air was thick with incense, its cloying scent masking something far older and fouler. The walls were lined with shelves filled with oddities, jars of pickled eyes, feathers from creatures Rodrik couldn't name, and talismans carved from bone. At the room's center, an easel stood, holding a blank canvas as if waiting. Madame Yelena emerged from the shadows, her presence commanding despite her diminutive frame. She was an elderly woman, her face a map of deep lines and scars that whispered of battles with time and darker forces. Her eyes, though clouded with age, seemed to pierce Rodrik's very being. "You seek the truth," she said without preamble, her voice raspy yet firm. "Or perhaps a lie you can live with." Rodrik smirked but said nothing. He removed his fur-lined gloves and placed a small pouch of gold coins on a nearby table. Yelena ignored the payment, instead motioning him toward a chair before the easel. "Silence," she said. "Sit," she commanded. "I will show you what you truly are." Rodrik hesitated. "What do you mean, what I truly am?" "I came for guidance, not philosophy." Rodrik. "Guidance," Yelena chuckled, a sound more like the scrape of steel on ice. "You know your path already, Captain. Your heart beats for one thing, obsession. Let me show you where it will lead." Before he could protest further, Yelena dipped a brush into a vial of shimmering liquid, its surface rippling like molten silver. As she began to paint, her movements were swift and deliberate, the strokes more like a ritual than an act of artistry. The canvas seemed to absorb her work unnaturally, the paint sinking into it as if it were a living thing. Rodrik sat in silence, an unfamiliar unease creeping over him. The room grew colder, and shadows danced unnaturally in the corners. Time lost meaning as Yelena worked, her eyes unblinking, her expression a mask of concentration. Finally, she stepped back, the brush trembling in her hand. "It is done." Egbert. Rodrik stood and approached the canvas. What he saw left him breathless. The portrait was eerily lifelike, capturing every detail of his rugged face, the sharp lines of his jaw, the fierce determination in his eyes, and even the faint scar that ran along his cheek. Yet there was something else. A darkness lingered at the edges, creeping like frost over glass. His likeness stared back at him, but the eyes seemed alive, flickering with a cold fire. "What is this?" Rodrik demanded, his voice betraying a flicker of fear. "This," Milena said, "is your soul, Captain. It is bound to you now. As you walk your path, as you feed your obsession, this portrait will change. It will reflect the darkness you bring into the world, the lives you take, the cruelty you sow. And yet, it will preserve you. Your body will remain untouched by the ravages of time and guilt. The canvas will bear your sins." Rodrik laughed, though it was hollow. "A clever trick, old woman, but I am not so easily swayed by tales of curses." Yelena's gaze hardened. "This is no trick, Rodrik Volynsky. The portrait is a gift and a curse. It will shield you from the toll of your actions. But mark my words, the darker it grows, the closer you will come to a reckoning." Rodrik stepped back from the canvas, his expression defiant. "If what you say is true, then so be it. Let the canvas darken. I will not falter." Yelena shook her head, a mixture of pity and frustration in her eyes. "You cannot bargain with the sea, Captain, nor with the forces that dwell beneath it."
"All right."
Gentle Solitary nodded, still gritting his teeth. He ignored her warning, lifting the portrait and cradling it as though it were a prized treasure. "This will come with me. Let it reflect whatever it will. I have a beast to hunt." Without another word, he turned and left the shop, the portrait tucked under his arm. Yelena watched him go, her wrinkled hands clutching the edges of her shawl as if bracing against a storm. As Rodrik strode back toward the Zimnyaya Dusha, he refused to look at the painting again. Yet he could not shake the feeling that the eyes in the portrait were watching him, even as he left it wrapped and hidden in his quarters. Chapter 3. Setting Sail. The Zimnyaya Dusha groaned as her engines roared to life, sending plumes of smoke spiraling into the frosty morning air. The Kislevite icebreaker cut a formidable figure against the icy backdrop of Ehrengrad's harbor, her reinforced hull glinting like iron teeth in the pale sunlight. Around her, dock workers scurried to secure the last crates of provisions, while crew members barked orders and checked equipment. The hunt for Moroz-Klyk had begun. The Captain Rodrik Volynsky stood at the helm, his hands gripping the rail with a sense of determination. The portrait, wrapped tightly in canvas, was hidden in his quarters, though its presence felt heavier than the ship's iron harpoons. He stared into the misty horizon, where the sea of claws awaited, vast and unforgiving. His long, labored mustaches had grown longer since the war. A cracked roof at the house made the portrait reel with a sense of unforgiving patience. Captain Rodrik Volynsky stood at the helm, his hands clasped together beneath him. Captain Rodrik Volynsky stood at the helm, his hands clasped together beneath him, his hands clasped together beneath him. His helmet only made the pressure painful. "Inyan steady, Captain," said Pyotr Dragunov, his first mate, with a firm nod. "We are ready to leave the harbor." Rodrik nodded in response, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "Then let's not delay. Hoist the anchor. Take us out." A chorus of shouts followed, and the Zimnyaya Dusha lurched forward, carving through the ice-choked waters with a low, guttural growl. The harbor's cacophony faded, replaced by the eerie quiet of the frozen expanse beyond. Into the sea of claws. The first day at sea passed with a deceptive calm. The crew, though hardened and experienced, moved with a mixture of wariness and excitement. Stories of Moroz-Klyk circulated below deck as the men gathered around the warmth of the galley's fire. "I heard it's as big as a mountain," said Sergei Karamazov, the ship's harpooner, his voice gruff yet tinged with awe. "Covered in ice and armor so thick No blade can pierce it. Another sailor, a wiry man named Ilya, shook his head. Armor, you say? I heard it's more like living frost. You strike it, and it just grows back. A younger sailor leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. They say it whispers to you, gets inside your head, makes you see things that aren't there. Pyotr entered the galley, his stern presence silencing the murmurs. Enough of that, he growled. You'll scare yourselves into madness before we even sight the beast. Focus on your duties. The captain won't tolerate slackers. Third, added Peter, placing a hand on the captain's scalp. The men fell quiet, though the unease lingered. The stories were more than mere sailors' tales. There was a weight to them, a truth the crew felt in their bones. Tensions rise. By the third day, the Sea of Claws revealed its true nature. Icebergs the size of fortresses loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks like fangs waiting to devour the unwary. The ship's reinforced hull groaned as it crushed smaller chunks of ice beneath its weight. The horizon was a white abyss, blurring sky and sea into a single oppressive void. Rodrik stood at the prow, his breath forming frost on his beard. The wind howled, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like whispers just out of reach. He shook his head, dismissing it as the tricks of the sea. But he wasn't the only one who heard it. Below deck, the crew grew restless. Men muttered about strange dreams and shadows moving just beyond the ship's lights. Tools went missing, only to be found later in odd places, as if moved by unseen hands. The air itself felt heavier, charged with a malevolence none dared name. Hence, Sergei, ever the skeptic, tried to lighten the mood. We've faced worse, haven't we? A little ice, a little wind. It's nothing compared to the Norscan raids. But his words fell flat. The men weren't afraid of the cold or the storms. They were afraid of what lay beneath the ice. The chaos storm. By the end of the week, the calm gave way to chaos. A storm rolled in, sudden and violent, its winds shrieking like the cries of tormented souls. The sky churned with unnatural colors, purple and green streaks that crackled with energy. Waves rose like mountains, slamming into the Zimnyaya Dusha with unrelenting fury. "Hold steady," Rodrik bellowed, gripping the wheel as the ship pitched and groaned. "Secure the lines. Pyotr, report." Pyotr appeared at his side, his face pale but composed. "The men are doing what they can, Captain. But this storm, it's not natural." Rodrik didn't respond. He knew Pyotr was right. This was no ordinary tempest. The Sea of Claws had always been perilous, but this storm reeked of chaos. Rodrik sat back against the wall and stared down the dirt road toward the castle. The road ran behind the castle. The crew fought desperately to keep the ship afloat. Harpoons were tied down, barrels lashed to the deck, and sails furled to prevent them from tearing. But the storm had a mind of its own. It hurled ice and water with a rage that felt personal, as if it sought to punish their trespass. Through it all, Rodrik kept his focus. His obsession burned brighter than fear. Somewhere out there, beyond the storm, was Moroz-Klyk. He could feel it, its presence a weight in his chest, a pull he couldn't ignore. Curiously, the heat drain from the afternoon sunlight had warmed the territory just beyond the range of the dragon's light. Rumors and unease. When the storm finally passed, the Zimnyaya Dusha was battered but intact. The crew, however, was shaken. They whispered of shadows in the waves, of voices carried on the wind. Some even claimed to have seen glowing eyes in the storm's heart, watching them. Rodrik dismissed their fears, though he couldn't shake a growing unease. The portrait in his quarters seemed darker than before, its edges now tinged with a faint shadow. He told himself it was a trick of the light, nothing more. But deep down he knew the truth. The hunt for Moroz-Klyk was not just a battle against a creature of legend. It was a descent into something far older, far darker, a trial not of strength, but of the soul. As the icebreaker pressed on, cutting through the frozen seas, the whispers of Moroz-Klyk grew louder. And with each passing day, the crew wondered, would they be the hunters or the hunted? Several times, Moroz and Kal had whispered to each other that they should leave the mission and start new lives, like probably me. Chapter 4. First Encounter. The sea was a vast, glassy expanse, broken only by the occasional crack of shifting icebergs. The Zimnyaya Dusha crept forward, her engines rumbling like the heartbeat of a giant. The crew worked in tense silence, their movements mechanical as they scanned the horizon for any sign of their quarry. For days, the oppressive quiet had weighed on them, but now an unspoken energy thrummed in the air. Rodrik Volynsky stood at the prow, his eyes narrowing against the icy wind. He could feel it, an almost tangible presence in the water beneath them. The Leviathan was near. He said nothing. "Captain?" Sergei Karamazov's voice cut through the cold air. The harpooner pointed to the distance, where the horizon rippled unnaturally, a slow undulation that did not belong to the sea. Rodrik's heart raced. He turned and shouted, "All hands, prepare the harpoons. Pyotr, ready the ballast. Steady her course." The crew sprang into action, their unease momentarily forgotten. The ship's harpoon launchers were loaded with steel-tipped projectiles as thick as a man's arm, each one inscribed with runes meant to pierce even the toughest hide. The men murmured prayers to Ursun and other gods, clutching talismans for luck. What? The undulation grew closer, revealing a dark shape just beneath the surface of the water. It was massive, dwarfing the Zimnyaya Dusha. Icebergs drifted away from its path, as though the sea itself feared the creature's presence. Then it rose. The Leviathan emerges. Moroz-Klyk breached the surface with a sound like mountains collapsing. Water cascaded from its armored hide, which glittered with frost and jagged icicles. Its body was a grotesque blend of natural and unnatural, resembling a fusion of a kraken and a monstrous whale, with countless tentacle-like limbs writhing around its underside. Its glowing eyes burned with an icy blue light, locking onto the ship with a malevolent intelligence. The orange ship glowed like flaming oil. The crew froze in terror. Even the most seasoned among them were struck silent, their hands trembling on the harpoon cranks. It wasn't just the creature's size that unnerved them. It was the sheer wrongness of it, the way its presence seemed to twist the air and water around it. Rodrik, however, felt no fear, only exhilaration. This was it, the creature that had haunted his dreams and driven his every action. Moroz-Klyk, the Frostfang. "Steady, men," Rodrik barked. "This is what we came for. Sergei, take aim and fire." Sergei swallowed hard but obeyed. The harpoon launcher groaned as its arm was drawn back, then released with a deafening thud. The projectile shot through the air, its steel tip gleaming as it sailed toward the Leviathan. It struck true, only to shatter against the creature's icy hide. The Leviathan strikes back. A deep, resonant roar erupted from Moroz-Klyk, shaking the very bones of the ship. The Leviathan's glowing eyes flared brighter, and its massive tail rose high before crashing down onto the water, sending a towering wave surging toward the Zimnyaya Dusha. "Brace yourselves," Pyotr shouted. But the warning came too late. The wave slammed into the ship, tilting her dangerously to one side. Men were thrown across the deck, ropes snapped, and barrels tumbled into the sea. Moroz-Klyk didn't stop there. The Leviathan surged forward, its enormous maw opening to reveal rows of jagged, ice-coated teeth. It struck the ship's side, splintering wood and bending iron. The Zimnyaya Dusha groaned under the assault, her hull cracking like a fragile shell. Rodrik clung to the rail, his mind racing. "Reload the harpoons!" he yelled, though his voice was nearly drowned out by the chaos. "Keep firing! We can't let it escape." "Have you tried to bomb the?" But the crew was panicking. Some scrambled to reload, while others froze, paralyzed by fear. One man dropped his harpoon entirely, falling to his knees and muttering incoherent prayers. The Leviathan struck again, this time with one of its tentacle-like appendages. The appendage smashed into the deck, sending debris flying. A harpoon launcher was torn from its mount and hurled into the sea, leaving the crew defenseless. Rodrik felt the rage and desperation building within him. He had waited his whole life for this moment, and now it was slipping away. "No!" he shouted, his voice raw. "I won't let you win!" The darkening portrait. The Leviathan's roar seemed to echo in Rodrik's mind, growing louder and more distorted until it became something else. A whisper, cold and cruel, speaking words he couldn't understand. He staggered, clutching his head, as the whispers grew stronger. Unbeknownst to him, in his quarters below deck, the portrait began to change. The edges of the canvas darkened, as though burned by an unseen flame. The vibrant colors of his likeness dulled, and shadows crept across the painted face. The eyes, once sharp and clear, took on a hollow, haunted quality, mirroring the growing madness within Rodrik's soul. Above deck, the crew rallied to stabilize the ship. Moroz-Klyk, seemingly satisfied with the destruction it had wrought, sank back beneath the waves, leaving only a churning wake in its absence. Aftermath. The Zimnyaya Dusha was left listing in the icy waters, her hull cracked and her crew battered. The men gathered on deck, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. "We can't face that thing again," Pyotr said quietly, approaching Rodrik. "We're not prepared for this." Rodrik turned to him, his expression unreadable. "We'll repair the ship and press on," he said, his voice cold. "That was just the first round. The hunt isn't over." "The end?" Pyotr stared at him, his unease deepening. "Captain, that thing, it's not natural. We should turn back while we still can." Rodrik's eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity. "No, we don't turn back. Not now, not ever." As the crew began the grim work of assessing the damage, Rodrik retreated to his quarters. He closed the door and unwrapped the portrait. The sight of it stopped him cold. It was unmistakable. His face, now distorted and shadowed, stared back at him with a malice he didn't recognize. The edges of the canvas seemed to shimmer with an eerie, unnatural light. For the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into Rodrik's mind, but he shook it off, wrapping the portrait once more and setting it aside. Above him, the icebreaker groaned like a wounded beast, and in the waters below, the Leviathan waited. Chapter 5. The Whispering Curse. The Zimnyaya Dusha drifted through the frozen sea, her damaged hull groaning under the weight of each wave. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional crash of icebergs in the distance. The storm and the Leviathan's attack had left the crew battered, their spirits sinking lower than the waterline. But something else hung in the air now, a presence, invisible yet inescapable, like a shadow cast without light. The men huddled in groups below deck, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and haunted. They whispered of things they couldn't explain, dreams filled with cold, endless darkness, and voices that called to them in the night. "I swear I heard it," one sailor muttered, his hands trembling as he gripped a mug of watered-down ale. It wasn't just the wind. It was speaking, whispering things. Terrible things. "Ah," Sergei growled, though his voice lacked conviction. "You spend too much time staring at the ice. The mind plays tricks when it's cold." "But it wasn't just me," the younger sailor insisted. "Ilya heard it too. Tell him, Ilya." Ilya, sitting nearby, nodded reluctantly. "It was like it was inside my head. Not words exactly, but feelings, fear, despair, and something else, something hungry." A hush fell over the group as the weight of his words settled. Even Sergei, who prided himself on his skepticism, found himself glancing nervously at the shadows. The captain hears the voices. Above deck, Rodrik Volynsky stood at the helm, staring into the misty horizon. His breath curled in the freezing air, but he barely felt the cold. His thoughts were consumed by the Leviathan. At first he thought the sound was the wind, a faint, high-pitched whistle weaving through the ship's rigging. But then it grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't coming from outside, it was inside his head. "What? Rodrik?" The voice was faint, almost melodic, yet chillingly alien. "Rodrik, come closer." He spun around, expecting to find someone behind him, but there was only the empty deck. The whisper returned, soft, yet insistent, like the caress of icy fingers against his mind. "You cannot hide, you cannot resist." Rodrik gripped the railing, his knuckles white. He tried to shake the voice away, but it clung to him, burrowing deeper with every passing moment. Unlike the crew's fearful whispers, this voice didn't fill him with dread. It filled him with a strange, insidious determination. "You know what you must do," it urged. "Press forward, hunt, claim what is yours." He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. The Leviathan had done this. Its power was greater than he had imagined, not just a creature of the sea, but something far darker. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to turn back. The voice, for all its eerie qualities, felt right. Decay and preservation. That night, Rodrik retreated to his quarters. The room was small and sparse, the only personal touch being the wrapped canvas that sat propped against the wall. He lit a lantern, its flickering flame casting long shadows across the space. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, he unwrapped the portrait. His breath caught in his throat. The changes were undeniable now. The once vivid colors of the painting had faded, leaving his likeness dull and lifeless. Cracks had begun to form in the canvas, spreading like veins of frost. The eyes of the portrait, which had once mirrored his fierce determination, now seemed hollow, filled with an emptiness that sent a shiver down his spine. But his own reflection in the lantern's glass told a different story. Despite the relentless cold, the grueling journey, and the horrors they had faced, Rodrik looked unchanged. His skin was smooth, his features sharp, his energy undiminished. It was as if time itself refused to touch him. The contradiction was unsettling, yet he couldn't look away from the portrait. The decay spoke of something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. And still, the whispers filled his mind, urging him onward. "Answer us," he cried, at the top of his lungs. "Answer us. I need to know more. You are chosen," they said. "You are bound to the depths. Do not falter." Rodrik rewrapped the painting and set it aside, his hands steady despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. If the Leviathan's curse had marked him, so be it. He would not let it break him. He would press forward, no matter the cost. The crew's fears. The following days brought no respite. The crew grew quieter, their whispers now edged with fear and distrust. They avoided Rodrik's gaze, sensing a change in him they couldn't articulate. Even Pyotr, his loyal first mate, seemed uneasy. "Pietro," Pyotr said one evening as they stood on the deck, watching the endless expanse of ice and water. Rodrik didn't turn to face him. "They're sailors. Fear is part of the job." "This is different," Pyotr insisted. "Even I've felt it. There's something out here, something unnatural. We're not just chasing a beast, Rodrik. We're chasing doom." Rodrik's grip on the rail tightened. "Doom or glory, Pyotr. It's a thin line. But we're not turning back." Heisenberg lifted his head from his hands, then gazed at him, unmoving. Rodrik's grip on the rail tightened. He looked past Pyotr's side, shaking his head. "And if the line snaps?" Rodrik didn't answer. He couldn't. The voices wouldn't let him. As the Zimnyaya Dusha pressed on, the whispers grew louder, wrapping themselves around Rodrik's mind like a noose. The crew could sense the change in their captain, but none dared confront him, and in his quarters the portrait darkened further, the cracks spreading, the shadows deepening. "I wish to be understood in the case of my friends Rodrik Dusha," said the matron, the cracks spreading, the shadows deepening. Rodrik knew he was slipping further into the Leviathan's curse, but he also knew he couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Chapter 6. Mutiny Ember. The tension aboard the Zimnyaya Dusha was a living thing, coiling and writhing among the crew like a serpent. Every step on the iron deck seemed to echo louder. Every gust of icy wind carried whispers of distrust. It had been weeks since the Leviathan's attack, but its shadow lingered over the icebreaker, growing darker with each passing day. The crew, already hardened by the unforgiving sea of claws, now found themselves facing an enemy even more insidious. Below deck, in the dim light of the galley, the whispers grew louder. "This isn't a hunt anymore," Sergei Karamazov muttered, slamming a tankard down on the table. His voice, once bold and mocking, was now heavy with fear. "It's madness. The captain's lost his way." "He's cursed," said Ilya, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've all felt it, the whispers, the shadows. This isn't natural." The men around the table nodded, their faces grim. They had once followed Rodrik with confidence, inspired by his charisma and vision, but now they saw something darker in him. His obsession with Moroz-Klyk had grown into something monstrous, consuming him and bleeding into their lives. Every order he gave seemed to carry them closer to ruin. "What do we do?" one of the younger sailors asked, his voice trembling. "If we keep going, we'll die." Sergei leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "We take the ship. The mutiny unfolds." The plan was whispered among the discontented, a quick strike, a show of force to seize control of the Zimnyaya Dusha and turn her back toward Erengrad. Sergei, emboldened by his years of experience, took the lead. By his count, at least half the crew shared his fears. They couldn't fight the Leviathan, but they could fight a man. Exclusively trained, the German troops trained at Eruta. The mutineers made their move during the night watch. The ship was quiet, save for the groaning of the ice around her. Sergei and his conspirators crept toward the helm, weapons in hand, knives, clubs, anything they could scrounge. Pyotr, loyal as ever to Rodrik, was the first to spot them. "What's this?" Pyotr's voice rang out, sharp and accusing. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Step aside, Pyotr," Sergei growled, raising a harpoon. "This has nothing to do with you. We're taking the ship." The crewmen rolled him over quietly and dropped him into the water on the raft, before dragging Sergei out first. Pyotr squared his shoulders, his presence towering despite his smaller frame. "You think this is how you'll survive? Turning on your captain? On each other?" Sergei sneered. "The captain's a madman. He'll get us all killed." Before Pyotr could respond, Rodrik's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Mutiny."
Of course.
The captain emerged from the shadows, his coat billowing in the icy wind. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a cold fury. He held no weapon, yet his presence alone seemed to stop the mutineers in their tracks. "You disappoint me, Sergei," Rodrik said, his tone as frigid as the sea. "I thought you were stronger than this." Sergei bristled. "You're the one leading us to death, Rodrik. This hunt, it's cursed. You've seen it. We've all felt it. The whispers, the shadows." Rodrik took a step closer, his voice soft but lethal. "You think I don't hear them? You think I don't see the darkness? But I press on. Because that's what leaders do. They don't cower in fear. They don't turn back. They endure." Sergei raised his harpoon, his hand shaking. "You've lost your mind, Rodrik." "And you've lost your nerve," Rodrik said, a hint of pity in his voice. "But I won't let you drag the rest of us down with you." The captain's cunning. Before Sergei could react, Rodrik moved. With a speed that belied his years, he stepped inside the harpoon's arc and struck Sergei's wrist, forcing the weapon from his hand. A sharp punch to the jaw sent Sergei sprawling to the deck. "Down just once," Rodrik muttered. The mutineers surged forward, but Pyotr and the loyal crew were ready. A brutal skirmish erupted on the deck, the sound of clashing steel and shouted curses filling the frozen night. Despite their desperation, the mutineers were no match for Rodrik's cunning and the loyalty of his remaining men. Within minutes, they were subdued. Rodrik stood over Sergei, his breath visible in the cold air. "You had your chance to stand with me. Now, you'll face the sea." The mutineers were dragged to the ship's edge, their hands bound. Sergei struggled as they hauled him to the railing, but Rodrik silenced him with a glare. "Cast them off," the captain ordered. The loyal crew hesitated, glancing at one another, but Pyotr nodded grimly, and they obeyed. One by one, the mutineers were lowered onto ice floes and left adrift in the frigid expanse. Sergei was the last. As he was lowered, he met Rodrik's gaze, his expression a mix of fury and fear. "You're a monster, Rodrik," Sergei spat. "Moroz-Klyk will take you, just like it will take us all." Rodrik didn't flinch. "If it does, I'll take it with me." With that, Sergei was cast adrift, his voice lost to the howling wind. The portress's corruption. Later that night, Rodrik returned to his quarters, the exhaustion of the day settling into his bones. He lit the lantern and unwrapped the portrait. His breath caught. His chest hurt when he unscrewed the portrait, and the light came rushing in. The canvas was darker than ever, the shadows deep and twisted. Cracks spread across the surface like veins of frostbite, and his likeness had grown more grotesque. His painted eyes glinted with malice, his features distorted by cruelty and obsession. Rodrik's own reflection in the glass of the lantern was unchanged, sharp, youthful, untouched by the burden of his choices. He stared at the portrait for a long moment, then rewrapped it and set it aside. The ship creaked and groaned as it pressed forward into the icy unknown, its captain resolute and unyielding. Behind him, the crew whispered in fear. Below him, the Leviathan stirred, and within him, something darker took root. Chapter 7. The Call of Chaos. The cold was relentless, seeping into every corner of the Zimnyaya Dusha, chilling steel and bone alike. The ship groaned under the pressure of the ice-choked waters, as if protesting its own grim journey. The crew worked in silence, their eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion, their movements slow and deliberate. Tensions had grown unbearable, and now even the howling winds seemed to whisper accusations. Yet none dared voice the unease that hung thick over the vessel. In the dead of night, Captain Rodrik Volynsky sat alone in his quarters. The portrait loomed nearby, wrapped tightly in canvas, but its presence felt oppressive, as if it were watching him even now. He poured himself a measure of vodka, the liquid barely warming him as it slid down his throat. His thoughts churned, restless and unfocused, until finally exhaustion overtook him. He heard the He fell into a fitful sleep, and in the dark recesses of his mind, the chaos began. The dream. Rodrik found himself standing on an endless expanse of frozen sea, the ice beneath him cracked and shimmering like blackened glass. Above, the sky was an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of colors, violets, greens, and blues, twisting in unnatural patterns that made his stomach churn. There was no sound, no wind, only a deep, oppressive silence. A figure emerged from the shifting colors, impossibly tall and cloaked in shadow. Its form was fluid and ever-changing, an amalgamation of wings, tendrils, and eyes that seemed to blink in and out of existence. It was not entirely there, its presence more a suggestion than a physical reality, but its power was undeniable. Rodrik Volynsky, the entity said, its voice a cacophony of whispers layered over a deafening roar. You seek Moroz-Klyk. Pursue him immediately. Feel fear. Speak grief. Strengthen prayer. Stand now and press 8. Rodrik stiffened, his hand instinctively going to his side for a weapon, but he found himself unarmed. Who are you? He demanded, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. I am beyond names, the entity replied, its form shifting as it spoke, but you may call me the Great Maw of Tzeentch. I am the architect of change, the harbinger of chaos, and the master of fate. Rodrik felt a shiver run through him at the name. Tzeentch, the chaos god of change and deceit, the great manipulator. He had heard tales of the ruinous powers in his youth, but standing before this presence made the stories feel woefully inadequate. What do you want with me? Rodrik asked, his voice quieter now. The entity's form coalesced slightly, its many eyes locking onto him. You are drawn to my avatar, Moroz-Klyk, though you do not yet understand why. The Leviathan is not merely a beast, Rodrik. It is a test, a reflection of the will and sanity of those who dare challenge it. Those who falter feed its power. Those who triumph are never the same. Rodrik clenched his fists. I will kill it. The great maw laughed, a sound that fractured the frozen landscape around them. Kill it. You cannot kill change, Captain. You can only play your part in its design. The ice beneath him cracked wider, revealing a swirling abyss of colors and shapes that defied understanding. But you have proven interesting, the maw continued. You do not flee as others have. You do not despair. You press on, even as the whispers claw at your mind. Perhaps you are worthy. Rodrik stared into the abyss, his resolve hardening. I don't care about your games. Moroz-Klyk has haunted me for years. It destroyed my father. I'll see it dead, or die trying. Captain Johnson approached the edges of the crater, his mind filled with sorrow. He wiped away the tears that were trickling down his face. The entity seemed to consider this, its form shifting once more into a shape Rodrik almost recognized, a towering figure in robes, its face hidden by a mask of ice. Very well. Hunt my Leviathan, Captain. But know this, your victory, should it come, will not free you. It will bind you forever. Rodrik's vision blurred as the ice beneath him gave way, plunging him into the abyss. Awakening, he awoke with a start, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The lantern on his desk flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance and twist unnaturally. His clothes were soaked with sweat, despite the freezing air, and his head throbbed with the remnants of the dream. Once he swallowed, he realized how little he had enjoyed sleep the night before. The portrait drew his gaze, and with trepidation he unwrapped it. The decay had worsened. His painted likeness was almost unrecognizable now, the once vivid features warped by shadows and cracks. Yet, his reflection in the glass of the lantern showed no change, still youthful, still untouched. Rodrik rewrapped the painting with shaking hands and sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He couldn't tell the crew. They were already on the brink of collapse, their trust in him hanging by a thread. If they knew the Leviathan was tied to Chaos, they would abandon the hunt, or worse, turn on him. He rose and poured another measure of vodka, staring out the frost-covered window into the endless expanse of night. "Moroz-Klyk," he whispered. "Whatever you are, whatever it takes, I will see you fall." The captain's resolve. The following morning, Rodrik was a changed man. To the crew, he appeared as resolute as ever, barking orders with renewed vigor. But there was a coldness to him now, an edge that hadn't been there before. He drove the ship harder, pushing through ice and storms with a single-minded determination that bordered on madness. The crew whispered behind his back, their fear growing with each passing day. They couldn't know the truth, that their captain had gazed into the heart of chaos and walked away, that he had made a vow not just to hunt the Leviathan, but to defy the will of a god. And below deck, the portrait continued to darken, and the foreign language she read to quicken. Chapter 8. Into the Maelstrom. The climax of the story. Zimnyaya Dusha pressed onward into the icy wilderness, her iron hull groaning against the crushing embrace of the frozen sea. The air was colder than it had ever been, so frigid it felt alive, biting its skin and seeping into bones. Around them, the waters grew darker, the icebergs larger and more jagged, rising like sinister monuments to the sea's ancient fury. This was no place for men to tread, and yet Rodrik Volynsky pushed them deeper still. Above deck, the crew moved like phantoms, their faces pale and their eyes hollow. Exhaustion and fear had become their constant companions, but something worse was taking hold. The air itself seemed heavier here, charged with an oppressive energy that made even breathing feel like a struggle. The whispers began to grow louder. "Aha! Like the love of your life," Captain Andal wondered, confused. "Crushed?" Then smiled, feigning the words as he whispered. The whispers. It started with faint sounds, barely audible over the howl of the wind, words just beyond comprehension, like echoes trapped in ice. The sailors would pause mid-task, straining to hear, their faces tight with confusion and dread. "Do you hear it?" Ilya asked one day, his voice trembling. He was clutching a coil of rope, his knuckles white. It's saying my name." "Shut it," Sergei snapped, though his voice was unsteady. "It's just the wind." "Huh?" But it wasn't just the wind. The whispers grew more distinct, slipping into their minds even when the ship was silent. They carried promises and threats, pulling at the edges of sanity. The men began to avoid speaking of them, fearing the very act of acknowledgement would give them power. Visions and nightmares. By the time the ship reached the heart of the forbidden waters, the whispers had grown into something worse. Sailors reported seeing shadows that shouldn't exist, moving just out of reach of the ship's lanterns. Pyotr found one of the younger men staring out over the railing, his eyes wide and glassy. "What are you doing?" Pyotr barked, grabbing the sailor by the arm. "She's calling to me," the man said, his voice distant. "She's out there. She said she'd show me everything." Pyotr hauled him back and ordered 2 others to keep watch over him. But the incidents only escalated. Men woke screaming from nightmares they couldn't explain. Others refused to sleep at all, their bloodshot eyes darting toward the shadows as if something waited there. Even Pyotr, steadfast and pragmatic, found his thoughts slipping. One night, he dreamed of his wife and children, their faces pale and lifeless, their lips moving in a chorus of whispers that filled him with dread. He woke in a cold sweat, gripping the hilt of his sword like a lifeline. Rodrik's madness. While the crew faltered, Rodrik seemed to thrive. His obsession burned brighter than ever, consuming him like a fever. He spent hours at the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if he could see the Leviathan lurking just beyond the mist. He barked orders with a sharpness that brooked no dissent, driving the Zimnyaya Dushas deeper into waters no ship had ever survived. The crew began to avoid him, their unease growing with each passing day. They whispered of his madness, of the strange energy that seemed to emanate from him now. His voice carried an edge that wasn't entirely human. And his eyes. There was something wrong with his eyes. But no one dared confront him. The memory of the failed mutiny was still fresh, and the fear of the unknown was stronger than their will to resist. The portrait's transformation. In Rodrik's quarters, the air itself seemed to warp around the portrait. It was no longer just a painting, it was alive, pulsating with an energy that made the lanterns flicker and the shadows twist unnaturally. The canvas was now almost completely black, the cracks spreading like spiderwebs across its surface. Rodrik's likeness was a twisted caricature of its former self, the eyes sunken and glowing faintly with a malevolent light. Sometimes Rodrik would find himself staring at it for hours, unable to look away. The dark energy radiating from the painting seeped into the room, making the air thick and heavy. It whispered to him now, its voice merging with the Leviathan's. "You are close," it would say, "closer than any before you. Press on. Claim your destiny." I was determined. I wanted it. I wanted more. "You are close," it would say. Rodrik knew the painting was tied to his fate, that every step he took toward the Leviathan darkened it further. But he didn't care. The whispers no longer frightened him. They were a call to arms, a siren song he couldn't resist. The Maelstrom. As the ship pushed deeper into the forbidden waters, the sea itself began to change. The waves grew erratic, rising and falling with a rhythm that felt alive. The icebergs loomed closer, their jagged peaks glinting like the teeth of a predator. The sky churned with unnatural colors, a kaleidoscope of violet and green that reflected off the water in eerie patterns. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a storm began to brew. But it was no ordinary storm. The wind carried whispers now, louder and more insistent, and the waves seemed to claw at the ship as if trying to pull it under. Patrick stared into the darkness. Rodrik stood at the helm, his face illuminated by the flickering light of the lanterns. He didn't flinch as the storm closed in, the whispers now a roar in his ears. He could feel the Leviathan's presence, closer than ever, its energy pulsing through the sea and air. "We're nearly there," he muttered, his voice low but fierce. "Hold fast, Moroz-Klyk. I'm coming for you." Below deck, the crew huddled together, their fear palpable. Pyotr sat among them, clutching his sword, his gaze distant. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had already crossed a threshold, that they were no longer in the world of men, but in something far darker. and in Rodrik's quarters the portrait began to ooze a black, tar-like substance, the air around it warping as if reality itself was bending to its will. The dark energy seeped through the walls, filling the ship with an oppressive weight that threatened to crush them all. The Zimnyaya Dusha sailed into the heart of the Maelstrom, her captain unwavering, her crew terrified, and the Leviathan waiting. Chapter 9. Beneath the Ice. The Zimnyaya Dusha crept through a labyrinth of towering icebergs, their jagged peaks glinting in the eerie, shifting light of the chaotic skies above. The ice formations loomed larger than cathedrals, their translucent walls riddled with cracks and fractures that seemed to whisper as the ship passed. Beneath the surface, the dark, cold waters swirled with shadows, its depths unknowable. In the distance, the dark shadows of its cataract ridges drew closer together and stretched out well beyond me. The ship's hull groaned as it forced its way through the narrow channels, the sounds echoing like the wails of tormented souls. Captain Rodrik Volynsky stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the treacherous path ahead. He ignored the murmurs of the crew and the weight of their stares. The Leviathan was here. He could feel its presence, a tangible pressure in his chest. It was close, so close, but the beast refused to show itself. Instead, it played its game, luring them deeper into the frozen maze. "Hold steady," Rodrik commanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Keep the engines slow. Pyotr, watch the flanks." "Aye, Captain," Pyotr replied, though his tone betrayed his unease. The first mate's eyes darted to the shifting icebergs, each one seeming more unstable than the last. "I see," the crew whispered among themselves, their fear palpable. The oppressive weight of the ice walls and the shadows beneath the water gnawed at their nerves. Every creak of the ship and every groan of the ice set them on edge. The rush of the waves on the muddy beach audible over the sound of their feet. "They're moving," one sailor muttered, his voice trembling. "The icebergs, they're closing in." "It's the beast," another replied. "It's playing with us." "It's a way of coping," said the first. The trap. The first strike came without warning. A deafening roar shattered the quiet, echoing through the labyrinth like a thunderclap. The water around the ship exploded as Moroz-Klyk breached, its monstrous form illuminated by the faint, flickering light of the skies above. The Leviathan's glowing blue eyes locked onto the ship with a malevolent intelligence, and its body, armored with jagged ice and writhing tendrils, seemed to radiate cold. "Race for impact," Rodrik shouted, but the warning came too late. Moroz-Klyk struck with terrifying speed, its massive tail crashing into the Zimnyaya Dusha's port side. The ship shuddered violently, the impact sending men sprawling across the deck. Wood splintered, and a section of the railing was torn away, plunging 2 sailors into the icy water below. I needed steadiness now. "Man the harpoons!" Pyotr bellowed, trying to rally the crew. "Target its head!" And crewmen switched sides to their posts to do the task. The harpoon team scrambled to their stations, their hands shaking as they loaded the massive steel-tipped projectiles. One harpoon fired, but it glanced off the Leviathan's armored hide, shattering into pieces. Incredibility flooded through the oncoming throng of creatures who either hadn't heard the shockwave or had genuinely believed it was inorganic. Moroz-Klyk roared again, a sound that reverberated through the icebergs and into the very marrow of the men aboard. It surged forward, wrapping one of its tentacle-like appendages around the bow of the ship. With a sickening crunch, it tore away part of the icebreaker's reinforced plating, exposing the hull to the freezing waters. "What?" "Fire again," Rodrik shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "Aim for the eyes." Another harpoon fired, this time striking true. The steel point embedded itself just above the Leviathan's glowing eye. The beast roared in fury, releasing the ship and thrashing wildly. Waves surged around the Zimnyaya Dusha, tossing the ship like a toy. Death and despair. But the damage was done. Several men lay dead on the deck, their bodies broken by the Leviathan's assault. Others clung to the rigging or the remains of the railing, their eyes wide with terror. The air was thick with the stench of blood and fear. Rodrik refused to retreat. His obsession burned brighter with every passing moment, eclipsing even his concern for the lives of his crew. He gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "We're not done," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We'll kill it, or we'll die trying." "Ikeb?" The crew stared at him in disbelief. Piotr, blood running down his temple from a shallow wound, stepped forward. "Rodrik," he said, his voice low but firm. "The men are dying. The ship is failing. We need to get out of here." Rodrik turned on him, his eyes blazing. "You think I'll let it win? After everything? This is what we came for, Piotr? This is our destiny." "Your destiny," Piotr shot back. "Not ours." Before the argument could continue, the Leviathan struck again. It slammed into the starboard side, opening another gash in the hull. Water began to pour in, and the Zimnyaya Dusha listed dangerously. "Abandon ship," one of the sailors cried, his voice cracking with panic. "No," Rodrik roared, his voice like a whip. "We hold our ground. We fight." As the Leviathan circled the ship, its glowing eyes visible just beneath the surface, Rodrik felt something shift within him. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more insistent, urging him forward, feeding his hatred and desperation. His listener begged. "You'll pay for this," he muttered, his voice trembling with rage. "I'll see you dead, Moroz-Klyk. I'll rip you apart if it's the last thing I do." The beast roared again, almost as if in response, before disappearing into the labyrinthine ice. The water stilled, leaving the ship to float in the eerie silence of the maze. The crew, battered and broken, stared at the carnage around them. Rodrik turned back to the wheel, his grip ironclad. His obsession had consumed him completely, but he didn't care. The Leviathan was toying with them, and he would make it pay. He began to drive the vehicle with the downpour, fastening his gaze to the windshield as he looked for any sign of movement. He swerved, carefully, watching the patch of sky. Rodrik turned back to the wheel. The portrait's corruption. Below deck, in the captain's quarters, the portrait pulsed with dark energy. The black ooze that had begun to seep from its surface now dripped onto the floor, forming a slick, shifting pool. The painted likeness of Rodrik was unrecognizable, its features warped and twisted by malice. The eyes glowed faintly, mirroring the Leviathan's, as if the two were now linked. As they moved closer to the ice crater, as the ship drifted in the ice maze, the darkness from the portrait spread, seeping into the walls and floor. The air around it warped, bending light and sound in unnatural ways. It was no longer just a reflection of Rodrik's soul. It was something alive, something hungry. And with every step Rodrik took toward vengeance, the beast and the darkness grew stronger. Chapter 10. A Sacrifice Made. Quote, "The Zimnyaya Dusha drifted precariously in the frozen labyrinth, her hull battered and leaking, her crew fractured and terrified. The cold bit deeper now, more than a force of nature. It was an agent of despair, gnawing at flesh and spirit alike." Rodrik Volynsky stood on the bridge, staring into the swirling mist, his mind churning with a singular purpose. Moroz-Klyk would die, no matter the cost. Below deck, whispers of mutiny stirred again, but this time they were drowned out by something darker. The men spoke of shadows that moved on their own, voices that didn't belong to any of them, and the unbearable pull of the abyss below. Even Pyotr Dragunov, Rodrik's steadfast first mate, had begun to falter. He sought out his captain in the dead of night, determined to reason with him one last time. "Rodrik," Pyotr said, his voice soft but firm, "the men are at their breaking point. The ship, it can't take much more. If we keep going, there won't be anything left to hunt Moroz-Klyk with." Rodrik didn't turn to face him. Instead, he spoke in a low, distant tone. "There's a way, Pyotr. A way to end this." Pyotr hesitated. "What are you talking about?" he asked at last. Rodrik turned then, and Pyotr recoiled at the look in his captain's eyes. They were no longer the sharp, determined eyes of the man he had followed for years. They glinted with something else: madness, desperation, and a glimmer of dark power. "I found it," Rodrik said. "A way to summon the strength we need. But it requires sacrifice." Hen glanced at the dwarf, who shook his head from the ritual's price. The air in the captain's quarters was thick with an unnatural chill, the walls and floor warped by the dark energy seeping from the portrait. Rodrik unwrapped the canvas and stared at the grotesque figure it had become. His likeness was unrecognizable now, twisted, monstrous, and malevolent. The eyes glowed faintly, and the black ooze dripping from the painting had spread, pooling on the floor in shifting, unnatural patterns. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, guiding Rodrik toward the abyss. In his hands he held an ancient tome, its leather cover cracked and etched with sigils that seemed to writhe when looked at too long. He had found the book years ago in a forgotten corner of Erengrad, but it was only now, in the depths of his obsession, that its purpose became clear. Rodrik spread the tome open on the table, its pages covered in spidery script and illustrations of rituals too dark to contemplate. He traced his finger over the symbols, his lips moving silently as he read. Finally, he turned to Pyotr and the few loyal crew members he had summoned. "This is the only way," Rodrik said, his voice steady. "The Leviathan is not just a beast, it's a force of chaos. If we want to defeat it, we need power beyond mortal means." Pyotr's face paled. "Rodrik, this is madness. You don't even know what this will do." "I know enough," Rodrik snapped. "It will grant me the strength to destroy Moroz-Klyk. That's all that matters." Pyotr's hand moved instinctively to the hilt of his sword. "And what does it cost?" he asked. Rodrik's gaze didn't waver. "Sacrifice." The room fell silent. The other men shifted uneasily, their faces pale with fear. Pyotr's jaw tightened, and he took a step forward. His eyes followed suit on her pallor, focusing on her. "No," he said firmly. "I won't let you do this." Rodrik's expression hardened. "I didn't ask for your permission." Before Pyotr could react, Rodrik moved. With a speed and precision honed by years at sea, he drew a dagger and plunged it into Pyotr's chest. The first mate gasped, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Rodrik caught him as he fell, lowering him to the ground with surprising gentleness. Sorry, old friend, Rodrik whispered, but this is the only way. The dark power unleashed, supernaturals, and ghost stories help you relax and enjoy life in a healthy environment, support local businesses, and provide meals to those in need. The remaining crew members were too stunned to resist as Rodrik turned his gaze on them. They were bound and placed in a circle around the portrait, their muffled protests drowned out by the rising hum of the ritual. Rodrik began to chant, his voice low and guttural, the words twisting in the air like living things. The black ooze from the portrait began to spread, creeping toward the circle and pooling beneath the sacrifices. The room grew colder, the lanterns flickering wildly as the ship itself seemed to groan in protest. The sacrifices screamed as the ritual reached its climax, their voices mingling with the whispers that now filled the room. The black ooze surged upward, engulfing them, their bodies vanishing into the dark substance. The air crackled with energy, and the portrait began to glow, its monstrous eyes blazing like twin suns. Rodrik felt the power take hold of him. It burned through his veins, filling him with a strength he had never known. His vision sharpened, his senses heightened, and his body felt invincible. But with the power came something else, a darkness that clung to him, worming its way into his soul. The portrait's transformation. When the ritual ended, the room fell silent. The black ooze receded, leaving no trace of the sacrifices. Rodrik turned to the portrait, his breath catching in his throat. It had changed again. The canvas was now completely black, save for a single twisted figure in its center. The figure was barely human, its form warped and grotesque, its eyes glowing with the same unholy light that now burned in Rodrik's own. Rodrik didn't flinch. He felt no guilt, no regret. The whispers had quieted, their purpose fulfilled. He wrapped the portrait and left the quarters, his steps steady, his resolve unshakable. The captain reborn. When Rodrik emerged onto the deck, the crew recoiled at the sight of him. He stood taller now, his presence radiating an unnatural authority. His eyes burned with a cold, unnatural light, and his voice carried an edge that sent shivers down their spines. "Our situation is gotten out of control," Rodrik said. "We have the power now," he said, his tone commanding. "The Leviathan will die. Prepare the ship." The men exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed. They could feel the change in their captain, though none dared speak of it. The whispers had stopped, but the weight of what had been done lingered in the air. As the Zimnyaya Dusha pressed onward, Rodrik stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The darkness within him pulsed, feeding on his obsession, but he didn't care. All that mattered was the hunt. It was the rare moment when Michael David's presence could join him. Moroz-Klyk would fall, and if it cost him his soul, so be it. Chapter 11. Final Confrontation. The Zimnyaya Dusha carved through the frozen waters like a specter, her iron hull groaning under the strain of the journey. The ship was a shadow of its former self, battered and bleeding, its crew a mere handful of hollow-eyed survivors. Yet there was an unrelenting momentum driving it forward, as though the sea itself willed it to its end. The men worked in silence, haunted by the events that had brought them here. The weight of Rodrik's ritual hung over them, unspoken but omnipresent. They had seen the changes in their captain. His voice carried an unnatural resonance, his movements were too precise, and his gaze burned with an otherworldly light. Yet fear and desperation kept them in line. They were too far gone to turn back, and Moroz-Klyk was near. They could feel it, the Leviathan's presence pressing on their minds like the weight of the ice above them. The truth revealed. It was Piotr's replacement, a young and wiry sailor named Anton, who discovered the portrait. Searching Rodrik's quarters for supplies, he stumbled upon the canvas, its covering loose and tattered. Against his better judgment, he pulled back the fabric and froze. The painting was grotesque. The figure on the canvas barely resembled Rodrik anymore, its form twisted and monstrous, its eyes glowing with malevolence. Black ooze dripped from its edges, pooling on the floor in writhing patterns. The air around it was thick, bending light and sound in unnatural ways. Anton stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. He fled the quarters, his face pale and his mind reeling. Within hours, the crew knew. The whispers spread among them like wildfire, and fear turned to open hostility. As Rodrik emerged onto the deck, the men confronted him, their voices trembling with rage and terror. "Captain!" Anton shouted, his courage bolstered by desperation. "What have you done? That thing in your quarters, it's not natural. You've cursed us all." Rodrik's eyes burned as he looked over his men, their fear palpable. He stepped forward, his voice calm but laced with menace. "You think I've cursed you? I've saved you. Without me, you'd be dead already. You've sacrificed us." Sergei's voice, once steady, now trembled with fury. "You killed Pyotr. You murdered your own men. And for what? Power? For victory." Rodrik snapped, his voice booming. "Do you think you could survive this without me? Do you think you could stand against the Leviathan on your own? Everything I've done to bring us to this moment." The men fell silent, their fear outweighing their anger. Rodrik's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. "We are here, at the end of the world, because Moroz-Klyk is near. This is our chance to finish it, to become legends." He extended his hand, his tone almost pleading. "Stand with me, and I promise you will see the beast fall. Whatever lies beyond this, I'll face it myself." The men hesitated but eventually nodded. They had come too far to abandon their captain now. The Leviathan's challenge. The Leviathan struck at dawn, its roar shattering the icy silence. Moroz-Klyk rose from the depths like an ancient god, its massive form dwarfing the Zimnyaya Dusha. Ice clung to its armored hide, jagged and glistening, and its glowing blue eyes radiated a cruel intelligence. Rodrik stood at the helm, his face a mask of determination. "Man the harpoons," he shouted. "Hold steady and aim for the head." The crew scrambled to obey, their fear overridden by the urgency of battle. Harpoons fired, their steel tips piercing the air but shattering uselessly against the Leviathan's icy armor. Moroz-Klyk roared again, surging forward with terrifying speed. As the Leviathan struck the ship, its massive tentacles smashing into the deck, Rodrik stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Moroz-Klyk," he bellowed. "Face me!" The Leviathan paused, its glowing eyes locking onto him. Then it spoke. "You are bold, Rodrik Volynsky." The voice echoed in his mind, deep and resonant. "But your courage is a mask for your despair. You seek to kill me, yet you do not understand me." Rodrik's jaw tightened. "I understand enough. You are a monster, a servant of chaos. You've haunted me for years, and now I'll see you dead." The Leviathan's laughter shook the ship. "You think I haunt you? It is you who haunts yourself. You are bound to me, Captain. Every step you've taken has been at my design." Rodrik's hands trembled, but he refused to falter. "Lies. Look within," the Leviathan taunted. "Your soul is a ruin, consumed by obsession. You sacrificed those you loved, betrayed your men and tainted yourself with darkness. All for what? The illusion of control. The promise of vengeance. The words struck deeper than Rodrik wanted to admit. He clenched his fists, his voice raw. Enough. This ends here. The final assault. Fueled by fury, Rodrik ordered the crew to fire again. This time the harpoon struck true, piercing the Leviathan's eye. The beast roared in pain, thrashing wildly and sending waves crashing over the deck. Rodrik was the last to act. Rodrik seized a harpoon himself, his muscles surging with unnatural strength. With a guttural cry, he hurled it into the Leviathan's exposed wound. The steel buried itself deep, and the Leviathan recoiled, its massive body writhing in agony. But as the beast faltered, its voice returned, colder and more menacing. You cannot kill what you are, Rodrik Volynsky. You and I are one. The Leviathan's glowing eyes bore into his, and in that moment Rodrik felt the full weight of its words. The whispers, the obsession, the sacrifices. It had all led him here, not to kill the beast, but to become it. As the Zimnyaya Dusha reeled from the Leviathan's final thrash, the crew looked to their captain. They saw not a man, but something else. Something darker. Rodrik's eyes burned brighter now, and his voice carried an unnatural resonance as he shouted his final orders. Hold your ground, we end this now. And as the Leviathan dove once more, Rodrik prepared to face his fate. Whether victory or damnation awaited, he would fight to the bitter end. Chapter 12. The Monster Within. The Zimnyaya Dusha groaned under the relentless assault of the Leviathan. Moroz-Klyk, its massive body writhing in fury, lashed the sea into chaos. Waves crashed against the icebreaker, sending freezing spray across the deck. The crew clung desperately to the ship, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion. Yet, in the midst of the turmoil, Captain Rodrik Volynsky stood unyielding. He was no longer the man they had known. The ritual's dark power coursed through him, making his movements unnaturally swift and his strength inhuman. His voice boomed over the howling wind, cutting through the cacophony with an authority that chilled the crew more than the icy sea. "Reload the harpoons," Rodrik bellowed. "Aim for its heart." The men obeyed, their fear of Rodrik outweighing their terror of the Leviathan. They worked quickly, firing harpoon after harpoon into the beast. The steel-tipped weapons, once useless against Moroz-Klyk's icy armor, now struck true, their runes glowing with a strange dark light. Moroz-Klyk roared in pain, its glowing blue eyes flickering like dying embers. It turned its gaze to Rodrik, who stood at the bow, gripping a harpoon launcher with both hands. The captain's face was a mask of fury and obsession, his eyes blazing with the same unholy light that now burned in the heart of the Leviathan. The final blow. As the Leviathan surged toward the ship, Rodrik moved. With inhuman speed, he loaded a harpoon, its tip etched with symbols from the cursed tome. He aimed directly at the beast's heart, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. "This ends now," Rodrik growled, his voice low and filled with menace. The Leviathan lunged, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged, ice-coated teeth. Rodrik fired. The harpoon flew straight and true, piercing the beast's chest. The runes ignited, sending a shockwave through the creature's body. Moroz-Klyk let out a deafening roar, its massive form convulsing as the dark magic spread through it. Its tentacles thrashed wildly, smashing into the icebergs and the ship itself. The crew screamed as the Zimnyaya Dusha rocked violently, the icebreaker's hull cracking under the strain. The whaler's hull cracked again and again. Rodrik held his ground, his face twisted in triumph. He could feel the Leviathan weakening, its power draining as the harpoon's curse did its work. He stepped closer to the edge, shouting into the chaos. Ori grabbed Rodrik's waist, trying to retain him. His eyes focused. "Do you see now?" he roared. "You are nothing. I am stronger. I am your end." Moroz-Klyk's eyes dimmed, its roars fading into a low, guttural growl. For a moment, it seemed as if the beast might collapse into the depths. But then its gaze locked onto Rodrik one final time. Step by step, he descended the stone stairs to the deck. "You are wrong, Rodrik Volynsky." The Leviathan's voice echoed in his mind. "You are not my end. You are my beginning." The curse unleashed. The sea stilled as the Leviathan's massive body began to disintegrate, its icy armor shattering like glass. The fragments dissolved into the water, leaving behind a thick, inky blackness that spread rapidly, tainting the sea around the Zimnyaya Dusha. The crew stared in horror as the blackness crept up the ship's hull, seeping into the wood and iron. They stepped forward to start taking a sec. Rodrik turned, his triumph fading as the ship began to groan and shudder. The blackness spread across the deck, corrupting everything it touched. The lanterns flickered and died, plunging the ship into a dim, unnatural glow. "What's happening?" one sailor screamed. "Captain, what have you done?" The captain, who had been working the control panel, rose from his crouch and came to meet. Rodrik didn't answer. He could feel the curse settling over the ship, a weight that pressed down on his soul. The Leviathan's voice whispered in his mind, cold and triumphant. "I am part of you now, Rodrik, as you are part of me. Your victory is hollow, your triumph a lie. You have doomed them all." The ship began to sink, its corrupted hull crumbling into the blackened water. The crew scrambled for lifeboats, their panic palpable. But Rodrik didn't move. He stood at the bow, staring into the abyss, his face impassive. The portrait's transformation. Below deck, in Rodrik's quarters, the portrait changed once more. The canvas darkened completely, save for the grotesque figure that now dominated its surface. Rodrik's likeness was gone, replaced by a monstrous amalgamation of man and beast. Tentacles writhed from its form, its eyes glowing with the same malevolent light as Moroz-Klyk's. Moroz-Klyk's. The air around the portrait warped, distorting light and sound. The room itself seemed to twist and contort, as if the portrait's corruption were spreading outward, consuming everything in its path. Above deck, the crew's screams faded as the blackness engulfed them, pulling them into the depths. The Zimnyaya Dusha groaned one final time before vanishing beneath the waves, leaving only silence. Rodrik's fate, as the ship sank. Rodrik remained still, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The whispers had returned, louder and more insistent, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices. He didn't fight them. He didn't resist. He was no longer a man, no longer the captain of the Zimnyaya Dusha. He was something else. The sea claimed him, its icy embrace pulling him under. The darkness welcomed him, wrapping around him like a shroud. And as he sank, the Leviathan's voice whispered one final truth. "You are mine, Rodrik Volynsky. Forever." The waters stilled, the labyrinth of icebergs silent once more. The legend of the Zimnyaya Dusha and her captain would fade into obscurity, a cautionary tale told in whispers by sailors who dared the frozen seas. Immediately, but beneath the ice, in the endless abyss, something stirred. A monster, born of man and beast, bound by fate and curse, waiting for the next fool to challenge the sea. Chapter 13. Shattered Souls. The Zimnyaya Dusha listed heavily in the blackened waters, her once mighty hull splintering under the weight of ice and corruption. The black ichor left behind by Moroz-Klyk spread across the ship, crawling up the masts and dripping from the rigging like the veins of a dying beast. Every groan of the ship's timbers was a mournful cry, echoing through the frozen labyrinth. Below deck the crew had descended into chaos. The oppressive weight of the Leviathan's curse had broken their spirits, shattering their fragile grip on sanity. The whispers, once faint and fleeting, now screamed in their minds, driving them to madness. Madness unleashed. Anton stumbled through the narrow corridors, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps as he tried to escape the unseen horrors that seemed to stalk him. "They're coming," he muttered, clutching a bloodied knife. "I can see them. They're in the walls. They're in me." He wasn't alone. All around the ship, the remaining crew screamed, fought, or wept in despair. One man threw himself overboard, babbling about the Leviathan's embrace. Another locked himself in a storage room, his laughter echoing through the ship like shattered glass. On the main deck, Sergei Karamazov, the harpooner, stood against the chaos. His hands trembled as he gripped his weapon, but his resolve was failing. He glanced at the darkened horizon, his voice breaking. "We're cursed," he muttered. "There's no escape, no end." The black ichor crept closer, its tendrils reaching for him. In his final act of defiance, Sergei turned his harpoon on himself, ending his life before the darkness could claim it. Rodrik's reckoning. Rodrik Volynsky remained in his quarters, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The ship he had commanded, the crew who had followed him, even the Leviathan he had hunted, all were lost, consumed by his unrelenting obsession. The whispers of the Leviathan still echoed in his mind, a maddening chorus of accusation and triumph. "You brought this upon them," the voices hissed. "Your ambition, your pride, your greed." "Yaw!" Rodrik ignored them. He turned his attention to the portrait, now the centerpiece of his room. It was a grotesque masterpiece, its surface warped and alive. The figure on the canvas, an amalgamation of Rodrik and Moroz-Klyk, seemed to breathe, its glowing eyes staring directly at him. Unable to sweep the round, Rodrik ignored the glances. However, he couldn't lose his cup. He approached the painting slowly, his hands trembling. The dark energy radiating from it was suffocating, pressing against his chest like a lead weight. For the first time, he truly understood the cost of his obsession. What? The portrait had consumed everything, his crew, his ship, his humanity. Yet, he remained untouched. His reflection in the fractured glass of a shattered lantern showed a man in his prime, his features unmarked by the horrors he had unleashed. The disparity was jarring, a cruel mockery of the ruin around him. The soldier's shoes slumped on the ground. A number of bodies on the beach lay around. "You could end this," the voices whispered. "Destroy it. Free yourself." Her dispatch box read, "Trouble, coming, from Emilio Martin." Rodrik reached for the dagger at his side, his grip tightening around the hilt. He raised it toward the portrait, his heart pounding. But he stopped. A damned choice. His eyes lingered on the figure in the painting, its monstrous form a reflection of everything he had become. He thought of Pyotr, Sergei, and the others who had given their lives for his quest. He thought of the Leviathan's taunts, its final words echoing in his mind. "You are mine, Rodrik Volynsky. Forever." Rodrik lowered the dagger. He couldn't do it. The portrait was a curse, yes, but it was also a gift, a reminder of his strength, his determination, his survival. He had outlasted the Leviathan. He had faced the abyss and emerged victorious. "Destroy it," he muttered, his voice low and bitter. "No, I have earned this." He wrapped the portrait in heavy canvas and bound it tightly, sealing its dark energy within. The whispers grew louder, as if protesting his choice, but he ignored them. He placed the wrapped painting carefully in a chest, locking it with a rusted key. The ship's final descent. Above him, the Zimnyaya Dusha shuddered violently. The black ichor had claimed most of the ship, its tendrils pulling her deeper into the icy waters. The few remaining crew members succumbed to madness or the cold, their screams fading into the howling wind. "Lindus!" Rodrik emerged onto the deck, his face calm despite the chaos around him. He watched as the sea consumed his ship, the icebergs looming like silent witnesses to his downfall. The blackened water rose higher, but he felt no fear. He had made his choice. As the Zimnyaya Dusha began to sink, Rodrik stood tall at the bow, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The Leviathan was gone, but its mark remained. He was no longer a man, nor was he entirely human. He was something else, a monster born of ambition and obsession. The ship groaned one final time before disappearing beneath the waves, leaving only a ripple in the frozen sea. Rodrik's laughter echoed through the mist, a hollow, haunting sound that lingered long after the ship was gone. Eternal youth, eternal damnation. In the depths of the sea, the portrait waited, its dark energy pulsating faintly. Its figure, an eternal amalgamation of man and beast, remained unchanged, a reflection of its owner's soul. Oh. And somewhere, in the icy expanse of the Sea of Claws, Rodrik Volynsky wandered, ageless and cursed, a ghost of ambition, a monster born of his own making. Chapter 14. The Depths Take All. The Zimnyaya Dusha groaned in her death throes, her iron hull splitting as the weight of the sea crushed her. The frigid waters of the Sea of Claws surged across the deck, dragging away shattered planks, lifeless bodies, and the last remnants of hope. The icebreaker, once the pride of Kislev, was now a sinking tomb. Zimnyaya Dusha. Rodrik Volynsky stood amid the chaos, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as though the answers he sought lay somewhere beyond the icy mist. Around him, the few remaining crew members screamed and scrambled for lifeboats, their voices muffled by the howling wind and the roar of the sea. The black ichor left by Moroz-Klyk pulsed and writhed across the ship, consuming everything it touched. Rodrik, however, was calm. His hand rested on the chest containing the portrait, his other clutching a harpoon. He had fought the Leviathan and won, but the victory was hollow, its weight crushing him in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. Go. The icebreaker's descent. The ship lurched violently, throwing Rodrik against the railing. The chest toppled onto the deck, its lid cracking open slightly to reveal the edge of the canvas. Even wrapped in layers of canvas, the portrait's presence was palpable. Dark energy seeped into the air, warping the light around it. Rodrik gritted his teeth and scrambled toward it, his boots slipping on the icy deck. He grabbed the chest and heaved it toward the nearest lifeboat, his muscles straining under the weight. The whispers returned, louder now, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices.
Damn it.
Rodrik, you cannot escape. You are ours. He ignored them. Gritting his teeth, he lowered the chest into the lifeboat before clambering in himself. Around him, the sea swallowed the Zimnyaya Dusha, dragging her beneath the waves with a deafening groan. The icebreaker's final moments were a maelstrom of destruction, masts snapping like twigs, debris flying through the air, and the black ichor spreading like a stain across the water. Rodrik watched as the last of his ship disappeared, leaving only a jagged patch of ice and the mournful cries of seabirds. The Sea of Claws was eerily still now, its surface broken only by the occasional chunk of floating debris. Rodrik gripped the oars of the lifeboat, his breath visible in the freezing air. He was alive, but he felt no relief. The curse revealed. As the lifeboat drifted, Rodrik turned to the chest. He hesitated, his hands trembling as he reached for the cracked lid. The whispers urged him on, their tone both mocking and commanding. Slowly, Rodrik raised his hand. A scratch of clear parchment caught his eye. "Wake, brother." "You cannot look away, Captain. This is who you are." He opened the chest, peeling back the layers of canvas to reveal the portrait. The figure on the canvas was no longer just a twisted version of Rodrik. It had changed again. Now the Leviathan's features were unmistakable. Tentacles writhed from its grotesque form, and its glowing blue eyes mirrored the very ones that had haunted Rodrik's dreams for years. The man and the beast were one. Rodrik's breath hitched. The sight of the portrait was both horrifying and mesmerizing. He couldn't look away, even as he felt its dark energy crawling through him, binding him tighter to its will. Seeing the portrait, his entire body went rigid. "You cannot fight it," the whispers hissed. "You are bound to me, as I am to you. The sea is your prison now." Rodrik slammed the lid shut, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. He looked out at the endless expanse of ice and water, his mind racing. He had sacrificed everything, his crew, his ship, his humanity. And for what? To kill the beast? To prove himself? The Leviathan was gone, but its curse remained, etched into his very soul. Bitter realization. The lifeboat drifted aimlessly, carried by the currents of the frozen sea. Rodrik clutched the chest, his knuckles white. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, heavier than the icy air. He thought of Pyotr, Sergei, and the others who had followed him into this madness. They were gone, consumed by his obsession. For the first time, Rodrik felt the full magnitude of his isolation. He was alive, but it was a hollow existence, his soul tainted by the Leviathan's curse. The whispers grew quieter but never disappeared, a constant reminder of his bond with the beast. His shoulder, "You are mine, Rodrik Volynsky," the Leviathan's voice echoed in his mind. "Forever. As long as you live, I endure." Rodrik clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He had faced the abyss and survived, but the abyss had claimed him in ways he couldn't escape. The portrait, his twisted reflection, was his prison now, a constant reminder of what he had become. Yet even in his despair, a flicker of resolve remained. He had survived the Sea of Claws, the Leviathan, and his own madness. Whatever the curse demanded of him, whatever the portrait reflected, he would endure. He was no longer the man he had been, but he was still alive, and as long as he lived, he would not bow. Drifting into darkness, the lifeboat floated on, its lone occupant clutching his burden. The Sea of Claws stretched endlessly before him, its frozen expanse indifferent to his suffering. The Leviathan was gone, but its curse lingered. An unbreakable chain tying Rodrik to the sea and to his own monstrous reflection. Someone had to stand up to the crime and walk away with a living soul. In the icy silence, Rodrik whispered to himself, his voice a mixture of defiance and despair. "I am Rodrik Volynsky, and I am not done." The whispers laughed in response, their cold mockery fading into the wind as the lifeboat disappeared into the mist, carrying its cursed captain toward an uncertain eternity. Austerity. Chapter 15. The Eternal Hunt. The port of Kraskov was a grim, wind-swept settlement perched on the edge of the Sea of Claws. Its weathered docks groaned beneath the weight of fishing boats and small trade vessels, their crews braving the icy gales in search of meager fortunes. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and desperation, a fitting backdrop for the arrival of a ship unlike any other. At the end of the longest pier sat Moroz-Klyk, the sea's shadow. Its sleek, blackened hull glistened with frost, its jagged prow carved into the likeness of a monstrous sea creature. The ship was smaller than most, built for speed and maneuverability, rather than cargo or passengers. It radiated an aura of foreboding, as though the sea itself recoiled from its presence. The man who stepped off the gangplank was just as striking, tall and broad-shouldered with piercing eyes and a weathered coat trimmed in fur. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had long ago stopped fearing death. His dark hair was streaked with gray, but his face bore none of the wear of his years. If anything, he looked unnaturally youthful, a man in his prime, despite the haunted depth in his gaze. Rodrik Volynsky had returned, a reputation grown in shadows. The whispers of Rodrik's exploits had spread far beyond the frozen waters of Kislev. Sailors spoke in hushed tones of a solitary hunter, a captain who roamed the chaos-tainted seas, pursuing beasts that defied the natural order. They said he never stayed in one place for long, appearing only when the tides brought monsters to terrorize the coast. Some called him a hero, others a madman. Most avoided him altogether. His arrival in Kraskov was no different. The dock workers eyed him warily as he strode past, their whispers trailing in his wake. He paced the streets slowly, his clothing cascading. "That's him," one muttered. "The man who hunts chaos beasts." "He doesn't age," another said. "They say he made a deal with the gods." His self-restraint went too far. The attack ceased, but the peremptory words were left unsaid. Rodrik ignored them. He had long since grown accustomed to their fear. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. He had no time for their superstitions. He had a hunt to prepare for. More people came up the stairs, along with several priests and villagers, 3 in black cloaks and a faded blue robe. The portrait's shadow. Rodrik stepped into his quarters aboard the Moroz-Klyk, closing the heavy door behind him. The room was small and sparsely furnished, its only adornment a single locked chest tucked beneath his bunk. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so, and the faint sound of whispers echoed in the corners. Rodrik knelt before the chest, his hand hesitating on the key at his neck. Even after all these years, the act of opening it filled him with unease. The whispers grew louder, urging him onward, taunting him. "Come, Captain," they hissed. "Look upon your truth." With a deep breath, he unlocked the chest and pulled back the canvas covering. The portrait stared back at him, a grotesque and shifting amalgamation of man and beast. Tentacles coiled and writhed around its form, and its glowing blue eyes seemed to pierce through the room. The painting pulsed faintly, its surface alive with dark energy. Rodrik's face remained impassive, but his hand trembled as he reached out to touch the edge of the canvas. He could feel its power coursing through him, a constant reminder of the deal he had struck and the price he continued to pay. "You are me," he whispered, his voice a mix of defiance and resignation. "And I am you." The portrait offered no reply, but the whispers in his mind grew louder. They were always there, driving him forward, fueling his obsession. He had defeated Moroz-Klyk, but the Leviathan's curse bound him still. He was its avatar now, its eternal hunter. A new hunt begins. Rodrik replaced the canvas and locked the chest, rising to his feet. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He opened it to find a dock worker, his face pale and his hat clutched nervously in his hands. "Captain Volynsky?" the man stammered. "There's been sightings. Something in the waters near the coast. The fishermen won't go out. They say it's unnatural." Rodrik's eyes narrowed. "Describe it." The man hesitated, as though afraid to speak the words aloud. "They say it's massive, with glowing eyes and voices. It's been taking ships, dragging them under." Rodrik nodded, his expression unreadable. "Tell them I'll take care of it." The dock worker hesitated, his fear palpable. "Is it true? What they say about you?" Rodrik's gaze was cold. "What do they say?" "You're cursed, that you don't age because you're tied to them." Rodrik's lips curled into a faint smile, humorless and sharp. "Believe what you want. Just stay out of my way." Rodrik Tatum. He closed the door before the man could respond, his mind already focused on the hunt. Chaos-tainted creatures were rare, but they were never truly gone. The sea was vast, and its depths held horrors beyond imagining. Rodrik knew them well. He had become one of them. The eternal hunt. As night fell, the Moroz-Klyk 10 slipped silently from the docks, her black sails catching the icy wind. Rodrik stood at the helm, his hands steady and his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. The whispers in his mind were louder now, urging him onward. "You cannot stop," they said. "You cannot rest. The sea will never release you." Rodrik didn't reply. He knew the truth of their words. He was bound to the sea, to the Leviathan's curse, and to the portrait that had claimed his soul. But he had purpose. He would hunt, and he would kill, and in doing so he would hold on to the fragments of himself that remained. The ship vanished into the mist, leaving Kraskov behind. The sea stretched endlessly before him, its waves dark and unyielding. Somewhere out there, another beast awaited, another fragment of chaos to confront. Rodrik Volynsky was no longer a man, nor entirely a monster. He was something in between, a hunter bound to the eternal tides, cursed to stalk the chaos he could never truly escape. And as the Moroz-Klyk 10 sailed into the abyss, the portrait in its chest pulsed faintly, a twisted, living reminder of the man he had once been and the monster he had become.